something a little differently than we normally do. We always have questions, and we're going to have that for the next hour or so. But what we're doing differently this semester is we spend a whole semester on this one topic of nuclear safety. Professor Sagan represents the culmination of a semester-long process here, the appropriate culmination given his status in this field. And that process has included a whole series of events for our Garfield scholars to learn about this topic. They were briefed by our good friend of the Institute, Mr. John Lauder, who was and may still be, we don't know for sure, a CIA agent who was a specialist in nuclear intelligence. We then went to Washington, D.C., and last Monday we had a briefing by Jay Davis, who's a prominent scientist dealing with nuclear energy and a friend of our guest. We also had Thomas Graham on that panel talking to our students about issues pertaining to nuclear safety, and then we've come here today. The result of all of that is, including a rather unpleasant for them, I suspect, briefing on the bus by the Garfield scholars where they all had to brief each other as we drove through Pennsylvania talking about nuclear weapons. As a result of all of that, our scholars are sort of in a unique position of having an edge in terms of their knowledge about this subject. And so I'm the guy who gets to tell the rest of you, and I hope you don't get too offended, that we're actually going to devote about a half hour just to the Garfield scholars to ask questions. That's different than what we normally do. We normally just open it up and have one or two Garfield scholars go with their questions. This time we're going to spend about a half hour because they represent this residue of knowledge that we want to show off to the rest of you. So, and hopefully we'll get some really good questions for Dr. Sagan. They've all read his book, and I think all of them disagree with him. So, from what I can tell, and he's ready for that. He is ready for a good debate. He wants really strong questions, so come at him.
Okay. Hello, I'm Kyle Peters. My question, Mr. Sagan, is in your book, you write that due to the number of near accidents, it should not inspire extreme confidence for Americans for nuclear safety. Why couldn't the counter-argument be made that since no detonations accidentally, or no accidental detonations or wars have occurred, why couldn't that increase the confidence of Americans?
Right. Can people hear the question? Yes, okay. My own view, it's very difficult to know when you have a near accident, whether that is a sign that you should be confident because it was only near and wasn't an actual accident, or whether it should be a sign of worry because you thought everything was safe and you had a real close call. My own view would be that if you learned from each incident, a near accident would be a sign that you're actually improving over time because you would learn and adjust. What I tried to show in my book is not only that we've had near accidents with nuclear weapons. Most recently, well after my book, we accidentally loaded up 6 nuclear weapons on a B-52 bomber at Minot Air Force Base 2 years ago, flew them across the country, landed them, parked them on a base without guards on them because the pilots didn't know that they had nuclear weapons on board their plane. And only the next day, when they went into the base, did they learn. Now, had that occurred and we hadn't learned about it, I'd say, boy, that's a sign of danger. This one, because we learned about it and we've now changed the rules, would be a sign of improvement. So what's important is not just that whether there are accidents or near accidents, it's how much you learn from them. And what I tried to show in my book is that many of the problems that we've had are repeated again and again because the organizations involved have not been forced to face the facts of some of their own problems. And that's why in this other area of nuclear security, I'm fully supportive of things like the World Institute for Nuclear Security to try to improve our learning of these. Any complex system is going to have bugs in it. It can't be perfectly safe, and the goal is to improve it over time. So my final answer would be that whether a near accident should give you confidence or give you fear depends on whether you fix the problem that the near accident exposed. And I'm busy as a consultant and a worker with the IAEA and the World Institute for Nuclear Security to prove myself wrong. I would like to have that learning take place. Organizationally, I see that it's very hard for these organizations to learn, but creating new institutions to improve our learning from each other is the way that gives you hope.
First off, on behalf of all of Pyram, I'd like to thank you for coming out. My name is Ryan Hulick. My question is concerning the latter chapters in your book. You focus more on states, and you focus directly on the United States throughout your entire book. You don't necessarily say that total proliferation is a good thing. You make clear to point that out, but you make an argument that I agree with to say, hey, let's tone it down a notch. Let's not have B-52s flying over the United States on high alert all the time, which I could agree with. My question would be, how would we be able to have this walking on thin ice, as you brought up? How can we have countries such as Pakistan or India who really do fear each other and who are always scared of each other? Could we get them into a situation where they tone it down a notch like you suggest the United States should?
My answer would be that the United States should not get rid of its nuclear weapons in any way in a unilateral manner. As the country that has, with the Russians, the vast majority of weapons, we should work first with the Russians, and then as we get lower in numbers, we need to bring in the Chinese, the Indians, and the Pakistanis and others. The first place to start with India and Pakistan would be with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. The Indians and Pakistanis have said that they will ratify it together, but will never do so unless the United States ratifies it first. Now, they may be bluffing. We don't know. But from my contacts in both countries and my speaking there, it's my belief that their military and their nuclear laboratories would love to test nuclear weapons again. They last did so in 1998. They would like to create smaller weapons that are more easily used. They want to expand on the arsenal, build better bombs. Their politicians, however, want to do what the United States does. They want to be considered to be a responsible state. So they've signaled to us that they would consider ratifying the treaty so that they wouldn't ever test again either. So I would think, I don't know whether this will work, but I think it's time to see and find out. Would this mean that they get rid of their weapons right away? No, I think that Pakistan is very concerned about an Indian attack, so we'd have to work on the conventional arms balance, and we'd have to solve the problem of Kashmir. Those aren't easy things to do, which is why I don't think nuclear disarmament is around the corner. But I do think that if we take actions in that direction, it'll help rather than hurt the problems in India and Pakistan.
I think Lindsay was next. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Lindsay Kuhn, and my question is sort of branching off Ryan Helix. With the reduction in proliferation, it's been noted by certain scholars that a feeling of paranoia may ensue because there are much fewer nuclear weapons, and that could lead to the potential for a trigger-happy individual to, accidentally release a nuclear weapon because of the heightened paranoia. So would you still argue that redundancy and tight coupling, which you say in your book lead to increased chances of accidents, would actually be less effective in that instance when there is a heightened paranoia?
That's a great question. It depends on who's paranoid and who has close fingers to the trigger. I mean, clearly, I think you'd want to worry in a world in which we have a very small number of nuclear weapons. Could someone use them first and think that they could get away with it? And my argument here would be that once we get to low numbers, you want to have both a strong control over who has the authority to use those small numbers. And even though I've been a pretty active critic of missile defense plans, today and during the Cold War, it seems to me that missile defense in a world with very small numbers of nuclear weapons is a great idea, because it would be more effective against just a handful of missiles, and it could provide more insurance against that kind of rare but not impossible event of somebody getting their hands on one. So I think you still have a problem, but you try to address it through things like missile defense and improve security about who has authority and who has the codes.
Hi.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Diana. I have a question about the high reliability theory that you talk about in chapter 2, where you compare that with the normal accidents theory. You mentioned that citizens in a democratic society are not willing to manage hazardous organizations as if they were total institutions, according to the high reliability theory. So would it be true then to say that countries like Iran or North Korea have perhaps safer nuclear institutions than, say, democratic country like the US because of the nature of their government?
Right. That's a great question. So think about it this way. I was talking about the problems of guards at facilities. What rights do you have, and how could you, in the name of trying to improve security, not let certain people become guards at a facility? My own view would be that I would worry less about North Korea with respect to this set of problems. I still don't like them getting nuclear weapons, but a communist system can enforce reliability of its workers through dictate, through the KGB in the case of the Soviet Union, and they didn't have the same kind of problems that we did. I do worry about democracies, which in one case we had at the Rocky Flats facility in Colorado, there were some people who had ties to a right-wing militia group that had some neo-Nazi tendencies to it. The judges ruled that those people had every right to be guards, and that the company that didn't want neo-Nazi sympathizers to be guards at a nuclear power plant could not fire them for their political sympathies. So that would underscore this point that democracies can have their own set of problems there. Now, you also asked about Iran. Iran I don't think of as being that kind of top-down dictatorship. But Iran has its own set of problems. That is, the Revolutionary Guards control the nuclear facility, not the professional military. And the Revolutionary Guards have ideological tendencies that you see in Ahmadinejad that make them, I think, not the best custodians of nuclear power and not the best custodians of nuclear weapons.
I've been listening to people talk about nuclear disarmament all semester. All semester I've been thinking to myself, this just sounds like a pipe dream to me. The reason for this is that I look at the global resource competition between the United States and China, and I think, how can China effectively answer U.S. dominance, U.S. global dominance in 20, 30 years when the oil starts to run out? The only answer I can think of here is nukes. The only answer I can think of here is for them to massively draw up their nuclear arsenal. So do you have any reasons why you think they wouldn't?
How would that help them?
If they can threaten the United States with mutually assured destruction, the United States can't just declare war on them.
We couldn't declare war on them today. We wouldn't want to.
We wouldn't want to today. In 30 years, when the oil reserves have hit bottom and there's not enough to go around, what's going to happen?
Well, I don't think that we'd want to go to war with China over that. Indeed, one reason to pursue nuclear power is so that we don't have to face that kind of nuclear weapons problem in the future. So I think it is true that China is interested in expanding its arsenal, but they've also agreed to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and they're seeking some kind of agreement with the United States over missile defense so that they don't need to expand their arsenal. So is nuclear disarmament a pipe dream? No, I don't think it is. Is it a serious challenge? Absolutely. as President Obama has repeatedly said, this may not happen in my lifetime. That it's going to be a very, very hard process of negotiations. And as I also said, I think there'll be occasions where, as in Iran or Syria, that military force might need to be used to stop new countries from getting nuclear bombs. That doesn't mean it's a pipe dream. It just means it's a very difficult, long road to haul.
Just to preempt Rodney here for a second, we were going to do this by hand, and I'm delighted that so many people are getting just up and taking the initiative. But after Rodney goes, if you raise your hand, I'll just call on you, and then we'll do it that way. So.
Good evening, good evening. And I would like to say I'm probably one of the only scholars that agree with most, but not all of the book.
That's
However, our current stance right now on trying to disarm Iran from their nuclear power, in a sense, this whole badgering or trying to disarm them or whatever or direction that we are going, we see that Iran has taken multiple precautions in so that they don't. You know, they have building uranium or building their energy systems underneath ground, and even trying to take a more preferable option with UN security sanctions that have been done against Pakistan in the 80s and 90s that did not work either. That being said, this constant badgering of Iran for disarmament or trying to turn their nuclear positions into more energy efficient rather than weapons, could we say that it can push them in ways of doing the latter or making more powerful weapons that are worse than nuclear weapons, rather than just sitting back and letting them decide their own fate?
I do not think there are weapons that are worse than nuclear weapons. Perhaps there are some infectious disease biological weapons that you could imagine, such as a weapon made out of smallpox or something. But it's hard to really see, with those exceptions, anything worse than nuclear weapons in terms of the power and the civilian destruction that would occur. Where I agree with you is that I think the United States has sometimes encouraged Iran inadvertently. We've encouraged Iran to get nuclear weapons. Why? Well, because President Bush announced that there's an axis of evil in the world, Iran, North Korea, and Iraq. Then he attacked one of those countries. A second one, North Korea, withdrew from the treaty and immediately got nuclear weapons. And when asked what lesson should Tehran get from the fall of Baghdad to U.S. forces, a prominent U.S. Defense Department official said, the lesson is take a number. You're next in line. And there are some in Iran who say, we only want nuclear power. There are others in Iran who say, we want to say we only want nuclear power, because that's what our agreement is, but we secretly want to acquire as much material and as much technology so we can get weapons. I think our statements of that sort help the hawks win the debate. And what we hope that the sanctions will do is create a situation where they said, no, we're going to stop with nuclear power, we're going to get rid of the Natanz uranium enrichment facility, and only have nuclear power, and we'll buy our uranium from elsewhere. Is that possible? Yeah, I think that's still possible. Will I think Ahmadinejad will do it? Hell no. He's not going to do that. But could a future Iranian government accept such a bargain? Especially if the United States said, you know, we'll open up relations with you, we'll get rid of the sanctions. If you get rid of your uranium enrichment facility and only have nuclear power plants, those power plants, incidentally, by law, have to ship the material back to Russia when it comes out of the reactor. So the spent fuel rods are not kept in Iran. They're shipped back to Russia, and that's part of the deal. I don't mind Iran getting that kind of nuclear power. I just don't want them to enrich their own uranium, because I think they'll quit the treaty the way North Koreans did and make bombs out of that material.
Okay, I think, yeah, Jennifer, I think you're next.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Long, and my question is about a type of transparency system that they can have in the future. Because if we have nations that get rid of their nuclear program through force, how can we ensure that they won't, again, create a nuclear weapon program? Or is that something that has to be discussed at a later date?
there is a great deal of technical work being done to try to improve the safeguards that the IAEA has to try to detect what nuclear activities are going on around the world. Today, the IAEA learned from the experience with Saddam Hussein that the existing inspection systems were not adequate. Saddam had underground facilities that we did not know about until after the first Gulf War. They were destroyed afterwards by the UN and the international inspection teams. And so they established a new criteria called the additional protocol that today is voluntary. Some 40-some countries have agreed to it. And what the additional protocol says is that the IAEA has a right, if you sign this, to go into any facility on less than a day's notice. They say, we are suspicious about this facility. We don't know what's in it. We've had a leak or somebody's told us about a problem, or spies have passed on some information, and you have to let that country go into that facility. That would be a very useful thing if that became universal. Indeed, I would argue that any new country acquiring nuclear power should not be permitted to do that unless they've signed the additional protocol. I made that argument at this meeting I showed you the picture of with the former heads of the NPT Review Conference on the outskirts of the treaty negotiation in New York in May. A number of them agreed, and a number of them said, no, that's Americans. You're pushing more rules and regulations on us. Why don't you trust us? And my view is, I don't trust you. You shouldn't trust us. Trust but verify, and the additional protocol is a way of having verification on the spot. I should add, by the way, that Iran is one of the few countries that has nuclear power facilities that has not signed the additional protocol and refuses to let the IAEA into facilities other than the Natanz facility.
Brian, were you next?
My name is Brian Niemeyer. You mentioned earlier about how the United States should not unilaterally start to reduce nuclear arms. Say the United States begins a multilateral arms reduction treaty, and say at one point we look over our shoulder to realize that countries such as Iran or North Korea is no longer following us. What would the reaction of the United States be at this point?
I think it would be to stop the disarmament. If we can't do this multilaterally, we shouldn't do it, in my view. Now, that's not an ideal situation, but I think the fundamental error that many people have in thinking about this is to think that our option is the status quo versus disarmament. I don't think that's our option. Our option is a future in which many more countries have nuclear weapons and disarmament. Because I believe that we can't get universal adherence to the additional protocol. We can't get agreements to enforce sanctions on cheaters. We can't get an international fuel bank to have no uranium enrichment on individual countries if we don't move towards disarmament. Now, am I sure that this will work? No. And if a North Korea, which probably has maybe 6 weapons, if they say they're not going to get rid of any under any circumstances, would I get rid of our final 6? No, absolutely not. In fact, I probably wouldn't get rid of my final 20 under those circumstances. But do I think we need 1,500 weapons today? No, I think we go much lower before we get to that problem.
All right, great. Why don't we take 1 or 2 more Garfield people questions, and then we'll open it up to everyone else. There we go.
My name's Hannah, and you've mentioned, or we've all mentioned a few treaties so far, and I just wanted to ask your opinion on the effectiveness of the START 1 treaty, the outcome of START 2, and maybe what you see in the future with the START talks.
Okay. For those people who are not familiar, she's referring to what are the agreements between the Russians and the Americans, originally the Soviet Union and America, and what are the prospects for the future. The original arms control agreements that we had, like the SALT talks originally and then the START and START 1, START 2, were premised on the following logic, which is that the United States and the Soviet Union and the United States and Russia don't need as many nuclear weapons as they have, but there was a danger that both sides recognized that if you start building missile defenses, the side that shot first could not destroy all the enemy, but enough of their forces that retaliation wouldn't occur, and the ragged retaliation that come back would have missile defenses that could stop it. So you had reductions that could only go forward if you had an agreement not to build missile defenses. The United States decided to get rid of the Missile Defense Treaty, as is the right of countries to sign agreements. All of them have an agreement on how to get rid of them. And so once we did that, the Russians said, we're not going to have any more offensive arms control with you. We're going to keep the numbers. Indeed, we may build more. We don't want to have reductions. And what Obama's brilliance in this area, in my view, was to tell the Russians, look, we need missile defense because of Iran, because of North Korea. We don't need it because of you. And I will promise not to build missile defenses in the Czech Republic and in Poland, but rather to put them along the border nearer to Iran. And if we agree to do that, then you don't need to worry that our missiles, our offensive and defensive capabilities will get rid of your retaliatory force. And then the Russians agreed. And so the new agreement reduces the numbers, still high, still 1,500, but it's the right path to go. And it is predicated and could only be possible if we limit our missile defenses so that they protect us from Iran and from North Korea and not from Russia.
All right, why don't we just open up to everyone? Actually, well, you've had your hand up for a while, so Becky, if you want to go. And then, yeah, anyone else who wants to go, we'll just have a free-for-all after that.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Santo. I know you mentioned earlier that during the Cold War it was okay to use nuclear weapons as a form of deterrence. And while you say that we should reduce to nuclear zero, and Kenneth Waltz says that we should give nuclear weapons to everyone, I'm wondering, in the future, can you foresee a time where it would be appropriate, again, to use nuclear weapons as a form of deterrence?
I do foresee that using nuclear weapons as a form of deterrence is necessary if other countries have them. What I do think, however, is that it is an inherently dangerous deterrent. I don't have any problems with Ken Waltz saying that nuclear weapons have a deterrent effect. I think they do. But I do very much object to people who say they haven't had these other problems attached to them. And how you balance these other problems depends on your judgments about what are these different risks. And my point that I try to make over and over again in this book, The Limits of Safety, is that we've grossly underestimated how dangerous these weapons are because our government sometimes covered up facts that they didn't want the public to know about, like the B-52s that flew with nuclear weapons on board, or the pilot who armed his weapons accidentally and then claimed that a terrorist had come on board, or the guy who shot at a bear climbing a fence, thought it was a Soviet saboteur and sounded the alarm, and the wrong alarm went off during the Cuban Missile Crisis, telling people that a nuclear war had begun. None of those incidents were made public by the U.S. government. They were all kept very private, and therefore I came to the conclusion that we have a real problem of lack of transparency, and we can't judge those risks. If another country still has a handful of nuclear weapons, yes, I'd probably want to keep some and would practice nuclear deterrence, but it's not the ideal situation. and that therefore we need to try to work towards eliminating weapons, even knowing that that creates its own set of risks, including the possibility we might have to use military force against a cheater.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Sarah Ahmed had a question.
Thank you so much for coming here. Can anyone hear me? In Professor Thompson's class, we were studying Mearsheimer's theory and his definition about power. And what he basically says is how much military strength you have defines a state's power. In a world where, as you said, we have virtual zero nuclear power or absolute zero nuclear power, I'm wondering how the U.S. would define its military capabilities and therefore its power in order to somehow still maintain its status of being like the world police in case, you know, some countries require some kind of control.
Yeah. Oh, let me make one very specific point in answering this, but then a broader point. The specific point is that our conventional capabilities are unsurpassed today. And indeed, part of the problem that we have is that we need nuclear weapons less than some other countries need nuclear weapons who worry about us. So therefore, we have to use, our problem is not that we don't have conventional capabilities, it's that we have a surfeit of conventional capabilities and have to be very cautious about how we use it so that other countries don't feel as threatened. If somebody cheats on their nuclear commitments, then I'd be willing to use I'd use conventional capabilities, but otherwise I would say no. And indeed, we may have to, as part of the deal here, give up on the ideas about regime change, to say that we're going to enforce our desire to change regimes that we don't like. Well, if we go around doing that, it's a recipe to encourage nuclear proliferation. That's the specific point. The more general point has to do with the readings that you've done, which are what Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago calls a theory of offensive realism, that countries have to be offensive, going to war, building up their military power, because we live in a dog-eat-dog world in which there's no guarantee of security other than constantly being offensive. And I would note that the term offensive has two meanings in the English language. It means to be take the initiative, and it means to be obnoxious. We may have to sometimes be offensive in the sense of taking the initiative, but we are obnoxious and offensive to others at our peril because their reaction to us, as any good realist would tell you, is to build up their own forces in response.
Okay, maybe a in the back. Yeah, Andrew.
Hi, my name's Andrew Chinworth. In your presentation, you talked about the World Bank's corruption index.
Right.
And the World Bank collects hundreds of indicators, but few of them are based on something as so fickle and immeasurable as a human characteristic flaw. So I'm wondering how, and the World Bank will tell you, people at the World Bank will tell you that those indicators are often off and wrong because it's just something so immeasurable. So I'm curious on how you would react to the fact that we'll just never know if people are being corrupt or if governments really have gotten rid of everything they say they've gotten rid of.
Right. It is true that the World Bank indicators are imperfect. All indicators are, and this is a proxy measure, but it's not based on perceptions of human qualities. It's based on the number of incidents that have been known. It's imperfect because some of the known incidents may be underreported or maybe overreported in some countries. But it is still stark that with the hundreds of pieces of evidence and the 180 some countries that we're talking about, you can see such a big difference between the countries that have nuclear power and those that are trying to acquire it. How can we guarantee that there isn't corruption? I think there are some countries that have institutionalized corruption to the degree that they can't even see it themselves. It's really quite frightening. Take the AQ Khan network in Pakistan. Now, the Pakistani government claimed to be shocked when it discovered that their leading scientist, Dr. A.Q. Khan, who had run their uranium enrichment facilities, was secretly selling the same technology and even bomb designs to the Libyans and the North Koreans and the Iranians. I've been to Pakistan. I've seen A.Q. Khan's house. A.Q. Khan was not under house arrest. He was under mansion arrest after this. If a U.S. laboratory official had the wealth that A.Q. Khan displayed publicly, there are hospitals that he donated. He was a superhero there. Now, that's the sign of institutional corruption that's shocking from an American perspective. So do I worry that those kinds of countries get nuclear power? Will there be more corruption? Yeah, I think there will be. Can I pinpoint that it will be that facility, or that's the one country versus another country that has a higher problem? No. But I think these broad indices and this institutional corruption problem highlight a danger that we're going to have as we try to spread nuclear power around the world.
Okay, Zach?
Hello, my name is Zach Kratz. Now, I did not read your book, however, I did find your presentation quite fascinating, and it's very clear that you know precisely what it is you're talking about.
One tries.
And as interesting as I found it, there was one particular section towards the end that disturbs me at a certain level for, I'd imagine, much the same reason that a number of these smaller countries that are below us in global power and or political influence find the proposition of attempting to acquire nuclear power disturbing for themselves. And that is your suggestion that perhaps these countries do not have their own enrichment facilities, but instead rely on buying them from modern nuclear powers such as the United States or our allies abroad. Now, while I see that at face value, this seems like a perfect method for control, it also seems to me that in practice this would give powerful countries around the world like ourselves the ability to basically control a country's energy plan. And that, to me, in practice, seems very, very much like an imperial system. How is it that you would reconcile such an argument with perhaps a smaller country who wants to begin their own nuclear power program, that this is merely a control regimen and not some sort of impeachment on their sovereignty as a state?
Right. Your argument is made by a number of people in Iran who say, you know, we understand that it's not economical for us to enrich our own uranium, and we have, even if we expand upon the Bushehr reactor and build new ones, it still doesn't make sense financially for us to do this. But you guys have a monopoly on this capability, and we can't trust that you won't sometimes exercise sanctions on us and stop us from getting that uranium. And I think they're right. It's hard to argue against that when we're having sanctions against them because of this program. So I think what the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General, Mohammad al-Baradei, did to try to address that legitimate question is to create a plan for a global fuel bank that would take the uranium that's enriched to low levels for particular kinds of light water reactors, store it at a neutral country, and to say that if you agree to this, we will encourage you to get nuclear power, provided that you agree not to enrich uranium. You'll buy it from the market. There's an international market. That's what people like. They like a market where they can get from the Russians or the French or the Brazilians or the Americans, and that this fuel bank will be the last resort. If for whatever reason they have to do this, they can buy it from the fuel bank. I think that was an excellent plan. It was much better than the Bush plan, which was buy it from us. That fuel bank plan has been approved by the IAEA, but it has not been accepted by Iran. And that's where things stand now.
My name is Jasmine Wyatt, and I'm from St. Vincent St. Mary High School in Akron, Ohio. I'm a senior. And nuclear disarmament has been a term that's been used many times this evening, and you seem to be a staunch advocate of gradual disarmament. And my question to you is, how exactly does one go about getting rid of these 1,500 nuclear weapons in our world today? Or what have been some recent methods that have been proposed to address this?
Well, technically, they're taken apart. So, we have dismantled thousands of nuclear weapons in the United States. And we take the materials, we take the weapons down to the Pantex plant in Texas, and they actually take the weapons apart very carefully, and then take the materials and use the materials, if possible, for a nuclear power plant. Indeed, a little known fact, this is, you have in the Bible, turning plows, swords into plowshares. We have in the United States policies to turn nuclear swords into nuclear plowshares, to turn nuclear weapons material into nuclear energy. In the state of Illinois, approximately half of their electricity in the whole state comes from nuclear power, and a significant portion of that nuclear power comes from former Soviet weapons that were taken apart, down-blended the uranium to be low-enriched uranium, shipped to the United States, and put into power plants where they produce electricity. It's a real interesting nuclear swords into nuclear plowshares. That said, right now, Pantex is oversubscribed. They have weapons that are sitting around in semi-dismantled form, and we need to spend more money to get that dismantlement program. So some people talk about arms races, and they worry about arms races. Well, I think we should be interested in encouraging a disarmament race to move more quickly to get lower numbers. Dean said to do it in a mutual and verifiable way.
Next question. Yeah, Mark.
I'm Mark Taylor in the physics department here.
Oh, good.
But I have a non-physics question. I've been
good. I was afraid you were going to ask me a physics question. I'd be in trouble then.
The whole issue of nuclear weapons, one thing that has always concerned me is if there was a first use of nuclear weapons by a responsible party, and sometimes I worry about Israel as being that responsible party that could be pushed into a situation where they might want to use, right. Would that somehow completely change the landscape and how this whole problem is thought about, do you think?
I don't know. It would depend, it seems to me, not just on who used it, but what the consequences would be. There is a theory out there that there's a nuclear taboo that has grown over time, and that countries like the United States contemplated using nuclear weapons many times during the early Cold War, but over time began to feel that this was wrong, or that moral opprobrium might be attached to it, and that a taboo has occurred. If a taboo is violated, the result afterwards sometimes is it becomes stronger. People say, God, that was horrible, and we don't ever want to do that again. If, on the other hand, this is not really a moral taboo, it's a tradition of non-use. And setting a tradition, when a tradition is broken, a new precedent is set, and it might encourage other countries. So, to me, it would be very scenario dependent, to use the Pentagon term that we would use in war planning. I could imagine, for example, if Pakistan used nuclear weapons first against India. Let's say there's a terrorist attack again, like the one in Mumbai or the one in Delhi, 2001, 2008, I think?
From Mumbai.
Mumbai, yeah.
2008.
2008, yeah. Mumbai. India might be interested in attacking conventionally inside Pakistan, and the Pakistanis might respond by using a nuclear weapon. Everything that we would want to do from a humanitarian perspective would say, let's stop that war right away. But from the perspective of trying to signal what would the future use of nuclear weapons be, would we want Pakistan to have shown that it can use nuclear weapons and get away with it? Or would we want India to punish Pakistan severely? I don't know what the right answer there is, but I think you can see that how scenario dependent it would be in terms of what the lessons learned from the first use of nuclear weapons would be.
Another question. Yeah, we can go there, and then we'll go to Joe after that.
No, I don't think there are situations where it would help. The Israeli situation is a very interesting one. Israel developed nuclear weapons, we think, in the 1960s with the assistance of the French. We didn't want it. In fact, we tried to stop them from building the Dimona reactor. They went ahead with it anyway, and we agreed to look the other way. Part of the agreement, implicit, not explicit, was that they wouldn't try to announce this to the world. Arab leaders knew that they probably had nuclear weapons, but to the degree that they flaunted it, it would create incentives for the Arab street to demand that their leaders get nuclear weapons too. So I think the Israeli policy of ambiguity in this regard, nuclear opacity, was a wise one and a statesmanlike decision for a country that feared conventional defeat, feared Russian intervention, and wanted to have nuclear weapons for that purpose. We may not like it, but that's what they did. So has that policy come to an end? Is it reasonable? I would like to see the Israelis enter into negotiations, but I do fear that if they came forward and said, we have nuclear weapons, here's the exact number, that it would encourage rather than discourage Iran. Today, I'd show you if I had a slide. I actually have in my wallet an example as well. The Iranian government has put on their 50,000 real note, the equivalent of their $5 note, a map of Iran with a nuclear symbol on it. And that's their way of telling their public that we have nuclear power now. They never acknowledge having designs to get a weapon, but they're public about it. In fact, they're proud, and they advertise it even on their $5 bill. To the degree that Israel announces that it has nuclear weapons, I would worry that the public desire in the Arab street and in the Persian street would encourage their governments to go further towards weapons rather than the other way around.
It's a pleasure to meet you. First of all, I haven't read your book, obviously. I could be persuaded to, but I haven't. I want to understand first, before I ask my question, putting aside the merits of the argument, do you believe disarmament is possible? Just on the grounds of it?
Is it possible? Yes.
Okay, so I have a logical kind of predisposition that I was hoping you could maybe answer in a way, in that, like, I view more the START treaty and things like that more as like saying, well, we should lose weight, but we're only going to cut back candy. It's a very initial start to it. Right. And so if we go longer and longer into the process and we get down to the very last stages of disarmament, my real question gets to the point of nuclear weapons as that states have them now. It's become an arm of their security. It's part of their security mechanism. And security is, in a way, an arm of a state's sovereignty. And so would a state, in the end, at the very last stages of disarmament, cede part of its security and thus almost, in a way, part of its sovereignty away? Like, in the end, if it was in the case of the United States, we would be put in a position where we would either be giving up weapons and therefore losing a militaristic edge to other states, or we would be keeping a militaristic edge over other states. And would it be rational for us to make that choice? Hopefully I made sense.
Yeah, it does. I'll try to express it in the way that I tried to express before. So I think the problem of stability of low numbers is one of the more serious ones. And the question of enforcement of cheaters at low numbers is equally serious. And I wish that we spent 1/100th as much time and money trying to solve those problems now as we do maintaining our current nuclear weapons arsenal. The amount of money that we put into thinking about this problem, financing research in this area, is really minimal. So I acknowledge that these are serious questions, but think that we've signed a treaty that says we will work in good faith in this way. We're asking other countries to give up some of their sovereign rights to build uranium enrichment facilities. We should, at least in theory, be saying, well, we might want to give up that right if we can do it in a mutual, verifiable way. And we should be spending money to try to create better verification mechanisms, create tools to understand that, to create confidence building measures like the additional protocol that has inspections. Can we get there? I don't know. Is it possible? Yes. Indeed, people like Ken Waltz say it's possible. It would be dangerous. But they're acknowledging that it's possible. And I'm saying I think it would be possible. It would have its own risks. But the risks would not be ones of nuclear war. There would be ones of conventional conflict. And that would be a price that I think is worth paying, although I understand that reasonable people could disagree.
All right, last question. Tom Sunderland.
My name is Tom Sunderland, and I was wondering, even considering the risks of setting a deadline, how long do you think it would take to fully have a nuclear disarmed world, ideally speaking at least?
Ideally speaking, if every statesman agreed now, I think that we could do this in a matter of a decade or two. It would just be a matter of dismantling the weapons in a safe way, having inspections of the other countries. But the nuclear problem, a disarmed world is not a permanently disarmed world. The nuclear genie is out, and people will know how to build these weapons again. And therefore, the way to think about this is not to think, well, how can we do it and then everything else goes away? The problem does not go away. You're going to have to live with it. Even if you live in a disarmed world, you'll have to live in a world in which the knowledge of building nuclear weapons exists, and we'll have to manage it. We'll live in a world in which there are dangers, and that you and your successors as leaders of our country will have to address real problems of verification, of enforcement, of confidence-building measures and arms control, whether we have a nuclear-free world or not. The poet T.S. Eliot ends one of his pieces by saying that people often try to dream up worlds that are so perfect that no one needs to be good. Well, there is no world that's so perfect that no one's going to need to be good. Even if we're able to create this world without nuclear weapons, you're going to have to be good. You're going to have to enforce, you're going to have to maintain the peace, and you're going to have to verify because the problems are not going away.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Sagan so much.
Thank you.